It was time for the king Amadi to choose his queen. The villagers couldn't believe the king's choice of a queen. The elders were really in disagreement because it was against their belief. In Amuro kingdom, there reigned a young king. His name was Amadi. The elders and villagers loved him. King Amadi was very handsome and attractive. He had ruled for months since his father's death. The people loved him, but they were waiting for something important, their king to choose a queen. One afternoon, the elders gathered in the palace hall. Chief Nkem, the oldest and most respected, spoke first. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice firm but respectful, "the kingdom looks up to you. It is time to choose a queen and secure the royal lineage." Amadi nodded, his face calm. "I hear you, Chief Nkem. I will make my decision soon," he replied. The elders left, but Amadi stayed behind. He stared at the carved faces of his ancestors on the walls, kings and queens who had followed the customs of the land. Their gazes seemed to weigh on him like a heavy load. Tradition demanded he marry. It wasn't just about love. It was about the future of the kingdom. But Amadi's heart held a secret so big it could shake everything his people believed in. As evening fell, Amadi walked through the palace gardens. The air was cool and flowers bloomed everywhere. He stopped by a hibiscus bush and plucked a bright red flower, turning it in his fingers. He wondered how he could ever follow the elders' wishes when his heart longed for something they would never accept. That night he couldn't sleep. He paced in his large room, the walls decorated with gold and fine cloth. His mind was a storm of questions. What would happen if his secret came out? Could he still be their king? A soft knock on the door broke his thoughts. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" It was Obinna, his trusted servant. "I'm fine, Obinna," Amadi said quickly. His voice was steady, but his heart was not. When Obinna left, Amadi sat by the window. The stars twinkled above, but he felt small and alone. The elders would be back soon, pressing him for answers. How much longer could he keep his secret? As the first light of dawn crept into the room, Amadi made a promise to himself. He would keep up appearances for now, but he knew the day was coming when he would have to face the truth. The palace bell rang, and the kingdom woke up to a new day. Amadi sighed, preparing to meet his people, hiding the storm inside him. What secret could trouble a king so deeply? The question hung in the air, leaving everyone to wonder. Amadi sat alone in his royal chambers, staring at the flame of the lantern on the table. The palace was quiet now, but his mind wasn't. Memories of how it all began came rushing back. It was during one of his royal inspections months ago, when the village was alive with activity. The palace had launched a project to build a new health center, and Amadi had decided to check on its progress. It was supposed to be a routine visit, something he had done many times. But that day turned out to be anything but ordinary. As he walked through the project site, surrounded by elders and guards, his attention was drawn to a lively group of youth corps members in their green and white uniforms. One of them stood out. He was tall, with skin that glowed under the sun, and a smile that seemed to light up the air around him. Amadi tried not to stare, but his eyes kept returning to this man. "Who is that?" he asked Obinna, his trusted servant who walked beside him. "That's Ease, Your Majesty," Obinna replied. "He's part of the NYSC team helping with the project." Ease, as if sensing the attention, turned and locked eyes with the king for a brief moment. He quickly bowed, but his gaze lingered, filled with curiosity. Amadi felt his chest tighten, though he couldn't explain why. Later that day, Amadi found himself near the group again. Ease stepped forward to greet him, his voice steady but warm. "Your Majesty, it's an honor to work on this project," he said. Amadi nodded, trying to appear calm. "You seem dedicated to your work." "That's good to see," he replied. The conversation was brief, but it left an impression. Amadi couldn't stop thinking about the way Ease smiled or the confidence in his voice. He had met many people in his time as king, but none had made him feel this way. Over the following weeks, Amadi found excuses to visit the site more often. Each time he would speak with Ease a little longer. They would laugh about the little things. How the sun was too hot or how some workers pretended to be busy when the elders came around. One evening, as the workday ended and the other workers left, Amadi and Ease sat under a tree. The air was cool, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. "You're different from what I expected a king to be," Ease said, his voice light. "And what did you expect?" Amadi asked, raising a brow. "Someone who never laughs," Ease teased, grinning. Amadi chuckled. "Then I've surprised you." "You have," Ease replied, his tone softer now. It was in that quiet moment that Amadi realized something deeper was forming between them. But it was a bond that could never be spoken aloud, not in a place like a Muro kingdom. Amadi couldn't keep Ease off his mind. Each visit to the health center left him feeling more confused, more alive, and more vulnerable. Their conversations had grown longer, their laughter softer, and their silences heavier. The pull between them was undeniable, yet terrifying. One late afternoon, Amadi found himself at the edge of the palace gardens, a place he often went to clear his thoughts. To his surprise, Ease was there too, seated on a bench beneath the shade of a sprawling mango tree. "Your Majesty," Ease said, standing quickly. "Sit," Amadi said, his voice calm but firm. Ease hesitated before lowering himself back onto the bench. Amadi joined him, and for a while they sat in silence, the warm breeze brushing against their skin. "You seem troubled," Ease said after a while, his tone gentle. Amadi turned to him, his eyes searching Ease's face. "Do you always speak so freely to kings?" he asked, half teasing. Ease smiled faintly. "Only to kings who seem like they need someone to talk to." Amadi couldn't help but chuckle, shaking his head. "You are something else, Ease." Just then, a distant shout broke the quiet. A worker had fallen while carrying supplies, and the commotion drew their attention. Without thinking, Ease sprang to his feet and ran toward the site. Amadi followed, his guards trailing behind. When they arrived, the worker was being tended to by others, the situation under control. But the moment had stirred something in Amadi, a realization of how quickly life could change, how fleeting moments were. As the crowd dispersed, Ease and Amadi walked back toward the garden, their steps slower now. "You didn't have to follow me," Ease said. "I wasn't about to let you handle everything alone," Amadi replied. When they reached the garden, the tension that had been simmering between them boiled over. Amadi stopped, turning to face Ease. "Why do you make me feel this way?" Amadi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ease's eyes widened, but he didn't look away. "Feel what way?" "Like I'm not myself. Like I'm alive," Amadi admitted, his chest rising and falling with each shaky breath. Ease took a step closer, closing the gap between them. "Maybe it's because you are alive, Amadi. Maybe for the first time you're allowing yourself to feel it." The words hung in the air, and before either of them could think, their lips met. The kiss was hesitant at first, but then it deepened, driven by months of suppressed emotions. Amadi's hands found their way to Ease's waist, pulling him closer. Ease's fingers brushed against Amadi's face, tracing the line of his jaw. Their breaths mingled, and the world around them seemed to disappear. For that moment nothing else mattered. Not the kingdom, not the crown, not the rules. It was just them lost in each other. When they finally broke apart, their foreheads rested together, their breaths heavy. "This can't happen," Amadi said, his voice trembling. "But it already has," Ease replied, his hand still on Amadi's cheek. Amadi stepped back, his heart pounding. He knew the path ahead was dangerous, but he couldn't deny the truth any longer. Ease had become a part of him, and nothing could change that now. The royal council had grown impatient. Days turned into weeks, and Amadi still had not chosen a queen. The elders summoned him to the council chambers, their faces stern and their voices heavy with tradition. "Your Majesty," Chief Nkem began, his tone respectful but firm. "The people are waiting. You must announce your choice for a queen within 3 days. The lineage depends on this decision." Amadi nodded stiffly, his heart pounding. "I understand," he replied, though he felt anything but prepared. The meeting left him rattled. As he walked back to his chambers, the weight of his secret pressed harder on his chest. He wasn't just delaying the decision. He was avoiding it entirely. How could he choose a queen when his heart was elsewhere? Meanwhile, whispers had started spreading through the palace. Servants and guards spoke in hushed tones about the king's strange behavior. Some said he seemed distracted, while others speculated he might already have someone he was hiding. Ease had heard the rumors too. He noticed the tension in the air and the way people looked at him when he passed. At first, he brushed it off, but when a fellow corps member hinted that the king's frequent visits to the project site had sparked gossip, Ease began to worry. That evening, as Ease stood near the edge of the palace gardens, Amadi found him there, staring into the distance. "You've been avoiding me," Amadi said, his voice low. Ease turned, his face unreadable. "Have I? Or have you been too busy to notice?" Amadi took a step closer. "What's wrong, Ease?" Ease hesitated, his jaw tightening. "I hear things, Amadi. People are talking, and it's only a matter of time before someone puts the pieces together. Maybe I should leave before things get worse." "No," Amadi said quickly, his voice rising. "You can't leave." Ease looked at him. His eyes filled with a mix of frustration and sadness. "What do you expect me to do? Stay here and pretend I don't feel anything? Pretend I don't see the fear in your eyes every time someone mentions the council?" Amadi grabbed Ease's hand, his grip firm but gentle. "I don't care what they say. You mean more to me than any of this." Ease pulled his hand away, shaking his head. "Then why can't you say it? Why can't you tell them the truth?" Amadi's silence spoke volumes. He couldn't answer. Not in a way that would make sense to Ease, to himself, or to the kingdom. "I can't lose you," Amadi said finally, his voice breaking. Ease turned away, his shoulders tense. "Then you have 3 days to figure out what you want, Amadi. Because I won't stay where I'm not wanted." As Ease walked away, Amadi felt the walls of his world closing in. The deadline from the council loomed, and now so did the threat of losing the one person who made he loved so much. How would my people feel if I happened to announce Ease as my queen? The palace was filled with excitement. The annual Festival of Choice was one of the most anticipated events in the kingdom, but this year it carried a heavier weight and significance. Today, King Amadi was expected to announce his queenate was a moment anticipated to shape the future of the kingdom. There were banners of bright colors around the courtyard, drums beat in rhythm, and the aroma of food filled the air. The people gathered in their finest clothes, and they were eager to witness the announcement of the queen. King Amadi stood in his chambers, dressed in royal regalia. His hands trembled as he adjusted the heavy beads around his neck. His heart raced not from the weight of his attire but from the impossible decision he had to make. A knock on the door startled him. It was his advisor, Chief Nkem. "Your Majesty, the people are waiting," Nkem said. His voice was calm, but there was no mistaking the urgency in his tone. "I'll be there shortly," Amadi replied, his voice strained. As Nkem left, Amadi caught his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at him looked like a king, but inside he felt like anything but. Across the courtyard, Ease stood among the crowd, blending in with the other corps members. His heart felt heavy, torn between staying to support Amadi and leaving to protect them both. Every glance toward the royal stage reminded him of the impossible gap between their worlds. Maybe this is it, Ease thought. Maybe today is the day I disappear from his life for good. The drums grew louder, signaling the start of the ceremony. Amadi stepped onto the stage, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the courtyard. The crowd cheered, their excitement palpable. As the noise died down, Amadi scanned the sea of faces. His gaze landed on Ease, standing near the back, and for a moment the world seemed to fade away. Chief Nkem stepped forward, addressing the crowd. Today, our king honors tradition by choosing a queen to stand beside him and ensure the continuation of our royal lineage. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Amadi barely heard them. His heart pounded as he stepped forward. His mind was in thoughts. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His chest felt tight, his throat dry. His gaze drifted back to Ease, who looked at him with an unreadable expression. The silence stretched, tension thick in the air. The crowd began to murmur, their excitement turning to confusion. Amadi took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the podium. He began, his voice shaky but steadying with each word. I cannot choose a queen today. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I have always sought to lead this kingdom with honesty and courage, he continued, his voice growing stronger. But to make this choice now would not honor the truth within me. Everywhere became silent, and Ease's eyes was wide with shock, and Amadi standing firm, leaving everyone to wonder what will happen next. The courtyard erupted into chaos the moment Amadi's words settled in the air. Some of the elders exchanged shocked glances, while others whispered furiously among themselves. The townspeople, too, reacted with disbelief, murmurs growing louder with each passing second. How can the king refuse to choose a queen? An elder hissed, his voice cutting through the noise. Chief Nkem stepped forward, his face pale but composed. Your Majesty, he said carefully, this is highly unusual. The people need an explanation. Amadi stood tall, though his heart was hammering in his chest. I have nothing more to say at this time, he replied firmly, turning away from the podium. The murmurs turned into shouts as Amadi retreated to the safety of the palace. Behind him, the royal guards moved quickly to disperse the crowd. Inside the palace walls, the elders convened an emergency meeting. Tension filled the air as accusations flew. He's lost his mind, Elder Okeke exclaimed, slamming his fist on the table. This is a disgrace to the throne. Chief Nkem tried to calm the room. Let us not jump to conclusions. The king must have his reasons. But Elder Okeke wasn't ready to listen. His voice lowered, dripping with menace. If the king cannot fulfill his duties, perhaps it's time we consider other options. Meanwhile, word of Amadi's shocking decision spread like wildfire through the kingdom. Supporters and critics alike debated his actions, and rumors about his reasons began to take shape. In the midst of the chaos, Ease found himself in an increasingly precarious position. He could feel the weight of eyes on him wherever he went. Whispers followed him, questions he dared not answer. Late that evening, as Ease prepared to leave the project site, two shadowy figures approached him. You're the core member the king is so fond of, aren't you? One of them asked, his tone mocking. Ease's stomach churned. He didn't answer, instead taking a step back. Careful now, the second figure said, blocking his path. You wouldn't want to cause trouble for His Majesty, would you? Before Ease could respond, the palace guards arrived, their torches casting long shadows. Step away, one of the guards barked, sending the two figures scurrying into the night. Ease's knees felt weak with relief, but he knew this was only the beginning. Back in his chambers, Amadi sat alone, staring at the flickering flame of a candle. He couldn't stop thinking about Ease and the danger his decision had caused. He'd hoped to shield Ease by staying silent, but now it seemed that silence had only made things worse. Amadi resolves to take control of the situation, even as the elders plot in secret to strip him of his crown. It was tension-filled for everyone. The night was dark and heavy with silence, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves as Amadi and Ease moved cautiously through the palace grounds. Amadi wore a plain cloak, the royal insignia hidden beneath layers of fabric. Ease, carrying a small bag of essentials, stayed close behind, his nerves evident in the quick glances he cast over his shoulder. "We can't stay here any longer," Amadi whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's not safe for either of us." Ease nodded, though fear gripped him. The memory of the two men who had approached him earlier that day was still fresh. He knew their escape wasn't just about Amadi's throne. It was about survival. They slipped past the guards stationed near the palace gate. Amadi had chosen the route carefully, knowing the guards would least expect him to leave this way. He trusted his knowledge of the grounds, but every sound, a crack of a branch, a distant shout, made his heart race. "Your Majesty," Ease whispered, his voice trembling. "Are you sure about this? What if we're caught?" Amadi turned, his face illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. "We won't be," he said firmly. "But even if we are, I'd rather face that than let harm come to you." Ease didn't know how to respond. He felt a mixture of gratitude and guilt. How had he become the reason for so much turmoil in Amadi's life? The two made their way through the dense forest that bordered the kingdom. The terrain was rough, and their progress was slow, but they couldn't risk stopping. At one point they heard voices in the distance, guards searching the area. Ease's breath hitched as Amadi pulled him behind a thick tree trunk. They stood close, their breaths mingling in the cold night air. "Stay quiet," Amadi whispered, his hand resting lightly on Ease's arm. The tension was unbearable as the voices drew nearer, then faded into the distance. When the danger passed, Ease let out a shaky breath, and Amadi squeezed his arm gently. "Let's keep moving," Amadi said. After hours of walking, they reached an abandoned hut deep in the forest. The structure was old but sturdy, hidden from view by overgrown vines and trees. "This will do for now," Amadi said, pushing open the creaky door. Inside, Ease collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. Amadi lit a small lamp, its warm glow filling the room. For the first time since they'd left, they allowed themselves a moment to breathe. "You didn't have to do this for me," Ease said softly. "You could have stayed in the palace. You could have." "I couldn't," Amadi interrupted, his voice steady but emotional. "Not when your life was in danger. I couldn't bear it." Their eyes met, and they kissed each other while they allowed themselves to lie on the bare floor. Late one evening, as they rested near a quiet river, the sound of footsteps reached their ears. Ease's heart skipped a beat. He turned to Amadi, who was staring into the distance, his brow furrowed in thought. "We're not alone," Ease whispered, his voice tight with fear. Amadi nodded slowly, signaling for Ease to stay quiet. They had become experts at moving in silence, but the weight of their situation was now unbearable. They had been betrayed. "Who could it be?" Ease asked, his voice barely a breath. "I don't know," Amadi replied, his eyes narrowing. "But we need to find out before it's too late." The two of them slipped through the trees, moving like shadows, each step careful and deliberate. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, and soon, a figure emerged from behind a large rock. It was Chief Nkem. Amadi's heart sank. He had trusted Nkem, one of the few elders who had seemed to support him in the past. But now, with the moonlight casting long shadows across the land, Nkem's face twisted with a different emotion. Anger. "Why are you here?" Amadi demanded, stepping forward. Nkem hesitated, then spoke with a coldness that made Ease's blood run cold. "The council has had enough, Amadi. You've disrespected the throne, and now you will face the consequences. Your actions have brought shame to the kingdom." Amadi's breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying?" he asked, the weight of betrayal settling in. "You and your lover," Nkem spat the word as if it were poison, "are nothing but a danger to the kingdom. I've been working to remove you from the throne, Amadi. And now, I'll make sure your little rebellion ends here." Before Amadi could react, Nkem took a step back, raising his arm. From behind him, several armed guards emerged from the shadows. The tension between them was thick, the air crackling with danger. Ease grabbed Amadi's arm. "We need to run." But Amadi stood still, staring at Nkem, his anger rising. "You've betrayed me," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "After everything we've been through, this is how you repay me?" Kem sneered. "Your love for him makes you weak. You will fall, and I will take your place on the throne." In that moment, the guards lunged at them, but Amadi and Ease were faster. They fought with everything they had, moving as one, their bond stronger than the enemies before them. The kingdom was on the brink of collapsing, and the stakes have never been higher. As the two flee into the night, the audience is left wondering whether they can survive the plot against them and reclaim their right to lead. Amadi's heart beat loudly in his chest as he and Ease approached the palace gates. After days of hiding, running, and fighting, they had finally returned. The palace, once a place of comfort and power, now felt like a battleground. The kingdom's future hung by a thread. The streets leading to the palace were empty. The people, once filled with hope and joy, now looked wary and uncertain. Word of Amadi's betrayal and the unrest in the kingdom had spread like wildfire. The elders had used every ounce of their power to turn the people against him, painting Amadi's love for Ease as a shameful act. But Amadi knew he had to return, not just for his love but for the people. He couldn't run any longer. He was the king, and it was time to take back his kingdom. When they reached the palace courtyard, Amadi and Ease stood face to face with Chief Nkem and the other elders. The tension between them was thick, like the stillness before a storm. "You've come back to face the music, I see," Nkem said with a sneer. His eyes burned with hatred. "You should have stayed in the shadows, Amadi. You've done enough damage to this kingdom." Amadi stepped forward, his gaze steady. "I've done what I believe is right. You and Nkem have only acted out of fear and greed. The people deserve a king who will lead with love, not shame." "Love?" Nkem laughed bitterly. "Your love has torn this kingdom apart. You've shown weakness, Amadi, and now you will fall for it." Amadi's eyes hardened. He reached for Ease's hand, a symbol of his defiance. "This is not weakness. This is courage. And I won't let anyone take my right to love who I choose. Not for the throne. Not for the people. Not for anything." The air crackled with the weight of his words. The elders looked uncertain, some shifting uneasily, while others stood their ground, determined to stop him. But before anything else could happen, Amadi raised his voice. "I challenge you all," he declared. "If you truly believe that what I've done is wrong, then let the people decide. Let them see the truth. Let them see that love, true love, is what will bring this kingdom into a new age." A murmur swept through the crowd of onlookers, and the tension in the courtyard grew. Amadi's challenge had struck a nerve. The elders didn't want to risk public shame, and the people didn't want to live in fear any longer. As the day wore on, the kingdom's council was forced to listen. Slowly, they began to understand the strength behind Amadi's words. But not without sacrifice. Many who had once supported him now turned away. And the elders, though defeated, refused to let go of their power easily. As the story closed, villagers were left with a bittersweet reflection. Sometimes gay love and courage require sacrifice. And in the end, it is those who are willing to fight for what they believe in that can truly succeed.